Quick video today, the 55 Pontiac. Yesterday and the day before, either or, we did a couple videos. We air filed all this in, and the video before that, I showed you how to use the round Durablock and recreate these body lines. The spear basically goes to nothing right there, disappears behind the bumper, goes up and curls down around the fender. So I went ahead, like I said in the video, and I finished a little bit of it out, and we just primed it. There's a couple little spots that I said we'd have to fix, and they're still there. And this is where we had some scratches and a low spot here as well. And the reason I didn't even prime back here, this is pretty smooth. We're going to fill back to here, and it's going to be paper thin, but only because we hit metal. So I want to make sure that I don't sand around the metal. So we'll fill here and so on. And I mean, we're talking skim coat. We'll put a fat little bit in there, and then we'll come across, we'll skim coat that, and then we'll drag a nice right up to this bump because we got a low right in here. Comes in okay, but we want to fill this top area and right down the edge. And while we're at it, this top edge is okay, but all the way around it is low, but right in the middle it's good. So I think what we're going to do, we're going to leave it right where it is. We're going to put a skim coat on the whole cap, and we're going to put a little bit of meat right here. I mean filler when I say that. The idea is we're going to block this in, and we're going to go right across with our block. And the cool thing about that, when you look down a car, you won't even notice the gas cap because it'll be right in there with everything else. So this is how it turned out. It's time consuming, and you got to do it 2, 3 times, 4 times, however long it takes. And eventually you get it to where this is really, really nice. So once we fill in those spots, we're going to wet them, make sure everything looks as good as it can be. And you want to check them wet. So we just put a thin coat of primer on. Now you can kind of use the primer when it's wet and look down the car, and it kind of helps you with little spots as you're working. Once you get this little bit on here, when we fix that, we'll do the same. I can take my wax and grease remover, give this a wipe, and it'll stay wet long enough. We can actually see what the panel will look like with wet paint on it. So if there's any little dings, grooves, or anything, we'll see them now. I think we're close enough that we can do, and of course after we check that, we're going to give this another sand, and all that primer is pretty much going to be like 90% of it will be gone to the floor, and that'll be our final block on this. And then we're going to put a few coats of this on it. It's a hybrid epoxy, and it's very sandable, which is what we want on there. So once we sand that goop off, put that on, we can block it, and it's already sealed and everything, unless we have any breakthroughs that we got to deal with, in which case you throw a bit of sealer on. Not a big deal. So that's how that turned out. And I don't know if I loaded any doing the trunk and this bottom piece, but the bottom we just kind of smoothened out. It's a little wavy, it's not perfect, but we don't care. We just didn't want it all beat and rough the way it was. We just wanted to make it soft. The trunk lid's all done. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 little spots we got to touch up. And some of them you could almost sand out, but the moment you do that, you're going to lose the shape and you're going to create a little bit of a ditch. I don't want to do that. We're really happy with the trunk lid. This trunk lid was severely beat up. We had to weld a lot of stuff shut, and there was dents and dings, and there was a dent here full of filler. We got most of the dent out and we filled it again. So instead of having this much filler, we now have, you know, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. I usually aim for that, and then you end up blocking it onto the floor, right? Like even here, if you saw earlier on the door, you see that patch? Well, we had a couple patches like that here. People go, oh, maybe you put too much on. Well, had I put too much on, I wouldn't have that low spot, and there's a low spot, and there's a low spot. And somewhere else there's 4. Oh, the rest is some of the sand scratching up in here from the 40. But this is nice. We have our shape where we want it to be. And again, you can wipe that down and make it wet and you can see it. So everything you see in gray, other than the spots I showed you, the rest is good. I wasn't happy with this body line. I was doing the same thing, but I loaded this one first, and on the other one I actually put more fill. And I remember thinking it was way too much. Well, as it happens, it wasn't way too much, because on this side, where I did what I thought was the right amount, we hit metal here and here, so that's as far as I can go, which means this has to gradually get a little fatter. So what we're going to do, you can see how that's low. If I blend that in, I'm going to lose my shape on the fender. Here, all low. Now I could take a little more out, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. We'll fill these little spots, and I'm going to put a little bit of meat all the way across here, flat, to give us something to block into the fender. And then I'm going to push it this way, and I'm going to put, how do I explain it, a layer like this on this angle on top of this. And I'm going to come way out. I'm basically going to put too much on. And then we're going to come back just past this weld. We're going to come where we're happy with it, and we're just going to block that in. And we're going to keep going until we see metal just like that, just like this. We'll see it right in the same spots. We probably won't ever see those guys again, because I'm going to, like I say, put a little more meat in there. And we'll come from there. We'll keep going back and forth just like the other side. And when we start to see a little metal here, not necessarily see the metal like we do here. Keep in mind, I did this with an air file. That's harsh. We used these. Even on that, we came off the edge, and then we had the bottom edge. And I know it's probably not the way to do it, but you take the bottom edge, and I used the long one. I went all the way across, and I came down the fender and drug it off. And you can see all these lows. Everything else is nice. So like I say, we'll just fill that up, and we'll have to do it one more time. It is what it is. That we're going to just block it off. I'll go over it with the file real fast just to get a little bit of the meat off, and then we'll finish it out by hand. That's all by hand. That'll take a couple minutes by hand. I'll just go over this real quick with the file, but this is the second and last coat, I think, on here. So this will be just to get these big bumps off and, you know, overlapping layers. We'll hit it with the file quick. We'll use the small one. And then we're going to take this all the way down into the rest by hand, same as that. And I mean, that'll look just like this. This was the bad fender, and that was the good fender. So, you know, it works. I threw a bit of primer on here. I wanted to see the shape. It's good enough. We can live with it. That side's not. I'm not even going to prime it. We're going to have to skim coat that and reshape it. We still got to finish up around both lights. We've got to wash out whatever all this junk is in here. We're going to spray paint that in some sort of satin black. So when you look through the cracks of the grill, at least everything in there is black. Only rust we found on the car, behind the bumper, right here. You see that grayish, whitish, blackish, whatever that mess is? That was all rust, and we converted it a couple of times. So now that we're where we're at, we're going to wire wheel it off right to the bare metal. We'll be happy at that point. It's converted. It's the only rust we found on the whole car, and it wasn't pitted deep. It was just on the surface. So what had happened is some of the filler failed, and it must have got some dampness in there. Unlike the rest of the car, that was the worst spot on this car. Now if you look up there, yep, that was all, that whole bottom piece is off another car, and it was probably welded on with torches and brazed in with what, brass or bronze rods. So once we clean that all off, we'll rough it up, layer of fiberglass and a layer of filler, and that'll block out nice. This isn't bad. This is just the fiberglass work. When I say fiberglass, I'm talking about the fiber-filled body filler. So we're going to come up past And we're going to fill that in, and that'll be just fine. No, we didn't take all the paint off this car. We're not going right down with this. We're not doing that. That's just a fact. I know people think you got to do it, but let's address that now. Customers got to want you to do that. Number one. Number two, can you turn it down? Yep, but I'm not going to do that and leave the guy hanging. People have certain budgets. So what we did is we pulled all the filler out of where we knew it was failing. Now, I'm glad I got this car in because it was kind of a good case study. The cool thing about this car, there was a major body job done on this car in 1974. The two guys who did the body work, I knew one of those guys. He's been passed away a few years now. But I did know him for quite some time, and he was very picky. Now, the guy that bought the car was only 14 in 1974, and he's owned the car ever since. So it's seen a couple of paint jobs, but the body had never been tore right down. And what was happening, there's a patch panel out of a 55 Chev in here, because believe it or not, these are the exact same car. It was all welded in, just like that brass I showed you on the front. It was all torch welded in. And I think what happened, there was a little bit of green on each side of that brass, and the filler was going choppy, weird, and shrinking and doing funny stuff. You could basically be like, everything's okay, and then right across here, all in this curve and everything, you could feel that it wasn't right, and it was starting to swell and do things. Now people say, well, don't do it like that again. Well, the green stuff we believe was some sort of corrosion, possibly flux, that didn't get quite washed off when they welded it. Now, we cleaned all that up, roughed it up, we knocked some of the highs in, took some of the dents out, and what we did is we went over all the welds with our fiberglass filled body filler, sanded that, and we didn't overdo it, just something to seal it up and stick really well, and then we filled the rest with our filler. Now, last time it was done with cheap filler from 1974. Maybe it's better than the stuff they make now, maybe it's not, but this is my takeaway. Regular body filler on well-scratched bare metal. It stays long enough that there was no rust under the filler in this car anywhere. There was no signs of primer or anything weird. They didn't epoxy it first. And people go, well, yeah, but if you do it that way, it'll be better. I agree. I totally agree with that logic. That being said, we had bare metal, patches everywhere, a whole lot of filler. Now it's got a little filler because we took a lot of the dents out where they just filled right over them. That's just how it was. So there was places with 3/8 of an inch of filler. We didn't like that, so we pulled those dents out. We figure there's a 1/16 of an inch. Could be a touch more in a handful of places, but there should be less than that most of the way through. So they had filler on scratched metal. Then they had, who knows what quality of primer they had, and then a couple paint jobs. So 48 years to failure. Now, the first year or two he said he had the car, it was a daily driver, and he drove it in the winter. And then when he turned 18 and got a real job, he bought a better car, and he kept this as a toy. So it's never seen winter, but it was like a spring, summer, fall car. He's had Kragers on it. He had it all cleaned up and done original, and then he went back to Kragers and some original, some not. Well, now we're going with a satin black, clearly resto mod, which is something he always wanted to do. He always wanted like a 55 blacked out hot rod. And he just didn't have the heart to do it. But now that the car's old and the chrome was all failing, we ditched most of it, and this is going to be a hot rod. So the takeaway, if I may, go down to metal, scratch it really well and clean it, and then scratch it again. Make sure it's got tooth. This thing where people try to metal finish and go super smooth and all that, that's for camera and it looks really good. Don't do that. Take a Roloc, 3640 grit, put a good scratch in that metal. Flood that thing with a layer of filler, block out what you need, Put a really good sealer or primer, something blockable on it. Make sure you read the TDS and that'll go on the filler, right? Doesn't matter what people say and what they think and what they do. There's a lot of products. Read your TDS to the stuff you're using. And by the way, sometimes buy the slightly better product. It don't hurt. A little money now is better long term and less steps. The reason I use the primer I use mostly, I can use it for everything. There isn't going to be 18 different things in here. Which, you know, isn't necessarily bad, but dry times and stuff, you know. Case in point, this whole car was done a little better than the other one, but we didn't take everything down to metal on this. But we took quite a bit of it down. That being said, the whole car right now, everything like around the jambs, around the doors, the whole bottom edge of the car, the complete rockers, all that stuff, things that rust, around the windshield, back window, that's all been epoxy primed. The rest of the car's got a hard urethane primer on it because it finished out real nice. The rear quarters, however, we left bare. Once everything dried, we hit those with the G2 feather fill. Now the reason we did that is because we wanted something really, really fat on there, and I want to try it to do a video. So I did one video, but we'll do a video when we block it out to see how it fares. But when that's done, I will have to recoat, you know, whether I use an epoxy sealer, you know, epoxy primer as a sealer, or maybe I'll do another urethane. You know, I'll have to read whatever's compatible. That's what I'm going to do first. We're going to have to seal that. Now, I've seen where people paint over the G2, and maybe you can do that. Again, read your TDS. I did read the TDS sheet, but I just don't remember now. I think I have to sand it and seal it, and then the car's, you know, sand and paint. So this car is almost ready for paint. Let's go have a quick look in the booth. I got the fender skirts and I've got the doors. They're all in epoxy. So by the time another week or so rolls by, we'll start sanding on that car. And this will have shrunk and done what we want it to do. And then we'll be able to block these out, put them on the car. We'll be happy. Now, here's a little tip. If you don't want to waste material, how do you know how much you're using on the doors? Well, by the way, you see that right there? We didn't have that other little bit of primer in there. We just blocked these off, and what happened is it sucked it in because I shot this on a little bit reduced. There's nothing wrong with that. This primer gives me a 4-day window. We're on day 2. So when we're done the video, I'm going to mix a little bit of primer up. We're going to paint right over this with 2 fat coats. And because this is still curing, it'll melt right in. Now on this one, this is the one that had a lot of work. You can kind of see. Now see, so this is where if you use like a cheapy primer or spray bombs and painted it, you could see that in the paint, and then you got to put extra layers of paint because it will suck it in. But now that it's sealed, I guess you could say, that won't happen. But because we want to block this out, we want a lot of meat, I'm going to mix enough up to go from this body line here right down to here. We're going to do 2 more coats. It'll melt right in because this stuff is 2 days old today, so still fresh. And we'll spray across there. And those will be golden. Now, when you mix up a cup of primer, especially when you're high building, you never know how much you need. When I did what I did, I had to add some more. These are the fender skirts. There we got one of the ground effects off of a Dodge Rumblebee. And that's what this is as well. Now 2 of them are already done. These are the other 2. So now that they've been primed the same way with the high build, we can block those off. And then we ran our gun out and it turned out we needed a little more primer for 1 door, so I mixed that up and then I gave that and that a second coat. I wasn't throwing primer in the garbage. So that was kind of cool. And I do have 1 more like this for the opposite side, and then we were able to find the front spoiler that goes under the bumper. Now some Rumblebees had it and some didn't. Our truck didn't. But we found one of these. One of ours was broke. We were going to plastic weld it, but I found a good one. A truck came into a local junkyard nearby. So I was able to get the other one, which needs to be sanded and primed, and also that spoiler. So the cool thing is, When I bring this car in and start priming parts for that, I'll probably have a couple Rumblebee pieces in here that I can fire real quick. And that way when I want to sand them and paint them later, they're already primed and ready to go. Anyway, success. We're happy with our body line. We're happy with the shape of the fender. I think this is turning out to be a nice car. And when we first got it, there was some high spots and low spots where this was welded. They had enough filler here that this door come out like 3/8 of an inch, like the fender came out past the door for no reason. And I think what happened was they did it with no door on the car, and then when they threw the door on close enough, painter. I mean, it was just sort of the way things were done. Their body work underneath, like I say, was really good. As for fit and finish and stuff, well, that wasn't a thing back in the 70s. It was slap her together, get the rust off, put her back on the road. We had to fix it here. We readjusted the doors. That's right here is where the door's going to sit. Now on these cars, they're known for the bottom coming out like that. Now, if you're replacing rockers, sometimes the aftermarket rockers are straight. You got to put a bit of arc in them and it pulls the quarter out. But I mean, realistically, we're going to live with that because this whole car is going to be satin black. But I mean, all here matches now all the way down, except for that little taper at the bottom. The fronts aren't perfect, but they're really close. And like I say, it was a disaster. It was something that I hated about the car. The hood's not terrible. You can see here where it looks like it should come out. Looks the same back there. We are going to pull the hood 1/8, maybe a little more forward. And this door could almost slightly move ahead to half up the gaps. But one thing with these Tri-5 Chevy bodies, and if anyone out there knows more than I do, let me know, but look how close that gets. It doesn't rub, but it looks like it would. And if you come back here, there's a little more gap, but not much. But if I want to bring the door back, no, right? Now, normally, I would just cut right through here, and I'd knock that back and re-weld it. This guy's not that picky. We're not putting that kind of time and money into it. So the doors aren't coming off the car. We're leaving them right where they are. Nothing touches. We will sand that edge really, really well. We won't put crazy high build primer up there. Up here, we'll just put a little light coat of sealer on each side, call it good, and we'll paint it. And that's something for any projects that you're thinking about. You got to kind of decide how far do you want to go, how nice do you want it to be. From 10 feet away, this car is going to look amazing. People are going to flock around it. 99% of the population at the car show is going to love it. This is not a picky car. This is something a guy's going to drive around and rip around. And he's an older fella, but he drives it like a 15-year-old kid. So, yeah, it'll be a fun car. Thanks for watching. Cheers.